Welcome, casemakers near and far. I'm Dr. Tiffany Manuel, and I'm the CEO and founder of The Case Made. One of the best things about the work that I do is that I get to travel the globe, and I get to hear amazing people who are doing the kind of things in their communities that are just so awesome. And when I hear great case making, there's only one thing that comes to mind: fierce. That's the energy of this series, and that's why I've invited you in. So come on in, take a listen. This is Fierce Case Making. Well, hello, everyone. I want to welcome you back to the series on fierce case making. And for those of you who've watched some of our previous episodes, you know that this is a place where we really highlight the fierce possibility of change. We highlight the folks who are working for justice, who are thinking about how we reimagine how we win, and thinking about folks who are doing the hard work of community building in places that have often been forgotten. And so I am so proud today to be joined by a colleague of mine, Michael Ansara, who I've known for just a few years now, but every single time I have the opportunity to talk with him, I learn something new that gives me hope for traveling further to justice in the future. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. T. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you so much. So I want to start us off just talking about how we met. We both got pulled into some fantastic work, addressing some of the issues that were outlined by Richard Rothstein in The Color of Law. He had this crazy, amazing idea that he could pull together a group of folks who would be really thoughtful about how we build a movement around redressing the racial segregation of the past, and that we could hold folks accountable for the decisions they had made in the past to redline, to segregate, to specifically be exclusionary in all possible ways, and that we could hold their feet to the fire, especially as they were making all kinds of pronouncements about apologies for this and apologies for decades of this and decades of that, that we were saying to them, it's wonderful that you want to apologize. We appreciate that. And what are you going to do about it? So we both got pulled into that work, happily so, and continuing to still do it. But talk to me a little bit about how that work sort of coincides with the legacy of the work that you have done.
Well, I'm pretty old now, so I'm getting on in the years. And when I was 13, I was walking past a Woolworth store, and I saw a picket line because they were supporting those very first sit-ins in North Carolina. And I stopped and talked with people in the picket line, and then got into the line and totally changed my life. That one step into the picket line just reshaped my direction completely. Mm-hmm. And I was mentored by a wonderful group of African-American organizers and activists in Boston who really taught me everything I knew about organizing. And they were so generous to this, pimply, naive, enthusiastic kid. And so the redress movement for me was a little bit like coming home, but also, as you said, we were in a period a few years ago, it's very different now, where everybody was talking about being an anti-racist, but not enough people were talking about the systems of oppression, the systems of power, and the history that we needed to change. Yeah. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to try and help that work. And, I really believe that all too often in America, we just don't know our history. There's sort of this huge amnesia, and it cripples our sense of the world. I mean, take segregation, housing segregation. There are millions of Americans who believe, well, it just happened because people want to live with people who are like them. And so that's how this happened. Well, as you know well and explain well,
Mhm.
that is not how that happened.
That's right.
And therefore, because they don't understand how it happened, they don't understand what to do about it.
That's right. That's right. I want to riff a little bit on that because I feel like that is a little we're still in that moment, but I feel like we're in a moment historically where a lot of the sort of government systems that have historically tried to address issues of racial equity, or at least some of the systems that were in place to try and solve for some level of community challenges, are being dismantled by this administration. And it's interesting about that because most Americans don't know why those systems were put in place, what they were meant to do, what they're solving for, and why it matters that they're being dismantled. And they don't get that until the things that they're used to stop showing up. They don't get
Right.
that until the hospital systems that they, assume would be there forever start to move and start to close. They don't get that until the rights and protections that they have assumed would be theirs are dismantled. And so we're in a moment where things are being dismantled, but by the time the sort of folks get that and start to fight for it, they're already gone. And so I'd love to talk with you a little bit about how you think about that, about how to get up and over that, right? We're sort of living through this moment real time, but that's a part of the dynamic that's happening that's really challenging, right? The folks want to fight after the actual fight is should have already happened. Say a little bit more about how you think about that.
Well, this is where the role of organizers are so critical
Mm-hmm.
because right now there are just beginning to be lines at Social Security offices
Right.
or lines at the VA
That's right.
or other institutions. And if they're organizers, the organizers work those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And the process is they first get people to recognize that what they're facing is not an individual problem, but is a shared problem,
Right.
and to understand the source of that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look back at the great movements that have shaped and really been successful, often we fixate on the one or two leaders who are really important and charismatic,
Mm-hmm.
or we fixate on the large scale protests.
Mm-hmm.
What we don't understand is the amount of organizing that went in. I mean, go back to the civil rights movement in the South. Certainly there were those dramatic actions, the boycotts, the marches,
Mm-hmm.
the confrontations, the sit-ins.
Mm-hmm.
But along with them was an endless process of organizing, of engaging with people and talking with them and getting them to see both the shared source of their problem, but also to provide hope.
Mm-hmm.
You need hope to take action, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't just take action because you're annoyed or angry or furious or oppressed. You need hope and you need a strategy.
Absolutely.
You need a case.
Absolutely. So speaking of hope, I want to highlight the book that's just come out, and hopefully those folks who are watching are going to pick it up. The Hard Work of Hope, a memoir. And I love this, and I want to read just a part of the very beginning of it because you hooked me in the preface. I got to tell you, because I think you do such a great job of talking about what the lessons from organizers from the 60s and 70s have that's truly meaningful for the moment that we're in right now. Like, right? So some people think, oh, that was a long time ago. That was a different age. The conversation was different. The issues were different. But actually the lessons learned are more than relevant. Feel a little bit like Groundhog Day. We're replaying this again, right? But I loved how you speak to a part. I'm going to read just a couple things that really hooked me. You talk about that you wrote this book for the activists of today and tomorrow. And you say that I grew up earnestly believing in America, believing that we were the most democratic, the most generous, the tallest, and the most athletic people in the world. As so many, right, in my generation, I believed in the unique promise of American democracy. I took our history seriously and thrilled to the worlds of the Declaration of Independence. And as you go further down, you talk about, but today is radically different, right, in terms of what's happened, but also in terms of the future ahead of us. And you say, the future that we are now, what we have now is radically different from any that we have imagined. We've succeeded in some ways abolishing Jim Crow, opening doors to the new Black middle class, preparing the ground for profound change and the possibilities for women, laying the foundation for an increasing freedom and equality for the LGBTQ community, and even seeding a long-lasting environmental movement. But we failed in larger ways, failing to stop the ever greater economic inequality, never succeeding to drive a stake into the beating heart of American white supremacy, rarely creating a political force that could effectively fight for the more democratic future that we believed in. Wow. And I found that as I read through many portions of the book, that there was that sort of past and present in the same moment. We got a lot done, and here are the lessons, but boy, did we missed some things. Talk a little bit about, as you were writing the book, the things that you felt like you really wanted to get, you want to pull forward as things for us to draw from and keep, right? And also the things that you want us to learn from that just didn't go so well in that round.
So, as you're saying, I wrote the book in the hopes that some of the lessons of our experience in the 60s and 70s would be helpful to folks today. And we made some critical mistakes, and I go into them in the book. For example, we didn't fully understand enough, and now I'm talking mainly about the anti-Vietnam War movement and the student movement. We didn't understand enough the power of symbols. And so, for example, by the late 60s, we were marching under flags of the NLF, the Viet Cong in Vietnam, not under American flags, which was just a huge mistake. And we allowed the opposition to appropriate patriotism and the flag. We also had a real problem figuring out strategy. I'll stick with the anti-war movement just for a moment. So we knew our demands, right? Our demands to end the war, but that's not a strategy.
Right.
And very rarely did we sit down and ask ourselves this really simple question: how does the war actually end? Right? Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, which means you have no strategy, means you have no direction.
That's right.
And so we never figured out, how does the war actually end, until we'd already been struggling for 8 years and went, Congress cuts off the money for it. So now we have to focus on Congress and get them to cut off the money for it. And so strategy is all important as you figure out how to move forward. Also, we had a very hard time grappling with both protests and elections. And when we looked at elections, as I fear many young people do today, we saw them as totally corrupt and rigged, that the wealthy and the powerful dominated. And so, for example, in 1968, in this incredibly close election between Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon, we said, don't vote. Boycott the election. Vote in the streets, vote with your feet. The election was decided by less than 1%. Now, Humphrey was a absolutely less than inspiring candidate, and we weren't wrong about Humphrey. But what we were wrong about is that we had a failure of imagination to see how bad things could get under Nixon. And, Nixon started the path of the Republican Party towards the party of white grievance and the party of Trump today. It started with Nixon's Southern strategy in 68. And we didn't understand that, and we didn't understand the forces that were being assembled to take this country to the right. And so we said, don't vote. Whereas you need a strategy that's comprehensive, that says, yes, there's a time for protest, absolutely, but there's also a time for electoral power as well.
Wow, Michael. It's so funny as you're describing that, it feels like this is yesterday and we're having this exact same conversation, as we're living through a presidential administration that has absolutely no respect for the Constitution, the rule of law, to the community building necessary to keep us healthy and strong and to keep America, at very least, advancing on the pathway of making some progress in some areas. We're living through that, and with very little, I would say, strategy from my vantage point, right, on the side of what I would call righteousness. Right. And it's not to say that people in their own little parts, their own parts of the world are doing some things. The failure of this larger conversation that feels big enough to build a bigger we around it and that feels strategic enough that people can see themselves in the future is a real missed opportunity. So I see lots of things happening sprinkled. I was like seasoning all across the country doing little things. And eventually lots of those little things will bubble up, right, and have us do something. But it just feels like this is an incredible moment that is being lost for the moment in terms of the failure of imagination for that vision of what people need to see to get excited, to be engaged. In my work, I talk about that in strategic case making. Like, if you don't know the vision that you have for folks and you don't explain the roadmap to get there, yes, this is voting, but this is one part of the ladder up to the bigger thing. If you don't do that, folks don't know how to judge what you're doing. They don't know where they are in the story that you're telling and whether or not they're even going to like where you're going.
Well, there is a huge strategic dilemma right now for those of us who want the country to move towards justice and not away from democracy. And that is that the Trump forces are destroying so much. We have to defend against that destruction. But a vast majority of the country actually wants change. And so how do we not become the defenders of the old status quo that really needed change at the same time that we defend against the destruction of so much under Trump? I think that's a real challenge. I also think the movement today needs to be very different from the movements of the 60s and 70s in a very particular way. Both the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, when we started, had to be prophetic minorities. The majorities of the country were absolutely, it's so funny. You would think that the March on Washington in 1963 and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, that everybody in America loved it. That, right? It was a wonderful moment.
Yes.
It was a kumbaya moment. Well, you go back and look at the polls. Over 2/3 of the country thought it was terrible.
That's right.
And the march should never happen. 70% said that actions and protests would not advance civil rights. But so in those days, we were a prophetic minority. Today, that's not the case.
Right.
Despite Trump winning the election very narrowly, and he really won it, by the way, because 19 million Americans who voted for Biden in 2020 did not cast a ballot in 24.
That's right.
19 million.
That's right.
So today, the opposition has to be majoritarian. It has to frame its vision, its case, its strategy about being majoritarian, and it needs to speak to a majority of the country.
I love that. And go back to earlier, what you were talking about in terms of one of the lessons that you learned. And you talk about this in the book, but just the symbols, right? Because I think one of the dilemmas also is the way in which I think the right has reappropriated some of those symbols. So to be patriots, right, means to be right on the right, to talk about and defend American democracy, right? They've sort of, taken that language.
I think it's very clear that what's being done now in Washington is un-American. It is anti-democratic. And it's critical that the opposition claim democracy, claim American history. No kings in 1775 or 1776, no kings now, and appropriate the flag and the other symbols and language of patriotism.
Yep.
And also of unity, that we need to unify the country, not unify it by submerging the needs of various parts of the population, but unifying it in a defense of democracy and decency and moving forward.
Absolutely. And in the work that I do at the Case Made, a part of the conversation that we often have with folks on the ground across the country is, I might say it, the short version of this is never waste a good crisis. The more longer version is, listen, folks, even in this season, there are some real opportunities to advance not just justice, but some real opportunities to advance the work that we're trying to do. So don't let the opportunity in the moment be missed by the fact that there's chaos that's being intentionally created, right, to demoralize folks. In fact, be energized by it and think about what this allows us to do. And from my vantage point, in the rhetorical sense, there are lots of things like redefining terms. You can't say diversity, you can't say equity, you can't say inclusion, you can't say all kinds of things. Well, I got to tell you, my version of that is, I don't know that those terms were serving us very well anyway. We can talk to each other about them, but most Americans have no idea what that actually means. So take the opportunity to start to say what it actually means. And if you walk down just even a short list of the things that Americans now enjoy because we have tried to be more inclusive, they go, oh, yeah, I like that. Oh, yeah, like, closed captioning and subtitles. I often say the younger that I get, the more those little subtitles, they help me out. For many Americans, the same is true. For many Americans, I mean, all kinds of things that we now enjoy, not just the curb cuts in the sidewalk that allow not just folks who are disabled to get on the sidewalk, but allow a lot of us who need, pushing strollers and pushing carts or whatever to have an easier time getting on the sidewalk. There are all kinds of things that we now enjoy because we were thinking about how to include more people into the fabric of our communities. And because of that, all of us get to enjoy something better. And if we talk about DEI as that, like that's the stuff that you appreciate, folks go, oh, well, I like that. Okay, well, that's what we're talking about. So there are lots of ways to be able to say that, even if you have to shed those initial words. So when I think about that, I think, what is it that that feels like we get to make some advances, even in a moment that's tough? Let's take it on. Let's do it. You want to talk about words? Let's do it.
Amen. And but what it takes is a profound faith in people. It takes believing that even the people who are saying vile things today, at least many of them, can be reached if we try to reach them.
That's right.
And that, the possibility of change exists because people can change. Social relations can change.
That's right.
But we have to have a vision of what we want to change into, and not just what we're opposed to.
Yeah.
But, as an organizer, I organized in doing community organizing, and I'd often be organizing in situations where white people were believing that Black people moving into their neighborhood was the cause of their problems. And so we had to go through a process with them. It wasn't, one conversation, but you had to reach them and go through, well, what's really happening? And the fact that Black families are not the source of the problem. In fact, Black families share with you that they're being hurt by this process of blockbusting that is lowering values for you and jacking up prices for them. But you had to have a profound respect. I mean, it's, if you really want to organize people, you have to love them.
That's right.
Even the people who use language that is offensive.
I love
You don't have to agree to the language. You can't agree to the language. You
That's right.
can't.
That's right.
But you have to love those folks and believe that they can change. Otherwise, you can't organize them.
That's right. Oh, I love that. That's so good. Because I think it's true. I mean, and even in the case making work, I think folks oftentimes write off whole groups of people, whole communities. Those are folks are not, and they look for the sliver of what they call the persuadables, right? They do the polling and they're like 0.57% of people we need to get. And they have to be the, folks who live in this part of the county, who work in these kind of jobs, who have this kind of background. And if we can pull those folks, we have just enough, right, to get over the hump. And I get folks are trying to get and use the resources they have and most directly and trying to infuse that, right? I get it, thoughtfully. But what often happens in that process is that you start writing off everybody else, and the messaging target those particular folks, irrespective of the opportunity to organize a wider group of folks. And I don't know about you, but I found in my work that sometimes it is the folks that you never thought would come back around, the folks that you had to work hardest to get them to lean forward. Those folks become the staunchest allies and organizers because they've had to come farthest, right, to understand the work, to really get structure, to really get systems, to really get the history. And when they get it, my God, I mean, like you just set them on fire in terms of bringing other folks forward. So I totally get that. This notion that you got to love folks, you got to believe that they can come forward. And I think the challenge for folks is you don't own the timing of their, their socialization or their aha moment. You don't. As you said, first time you talk to them, they write you off. They don't want to hear you. Next time you come around, maybe a little bit. It may take 2 years. Then they come back and you're like, wait, what has happened? But they're in the front of the line. They're the front of the picket line. Like, wait a minute, right? And so we don't own the timing of people's aha moments. And that is what's tough. People want to get right now, right? Because there's urgency in the moment and there's urgency in it. But you don't own that. You don't own how people come forward. What we do own is the strategies for making sure that people are exposed to the history, to the eyes that we have, the ideas that we have, and the vision for the future that we think should be inclusive. And you got to let folks come along where they are.
And exposed in a way that they can hear, right? I mean, if we start, I'll give you a very concrete, difficult example. So I would sit in, kitchens with white working class families who would start the conversation off using the N-word. So I had a choice. I could say, end of conversation. Or I could say, how could you possibly use that word? Or I could say what I would say, which is, I think that's a demeaning word. And I think we need to have a conversation about whether that's really the source of your problems.
Yep.
And allow not to demean them and not to patronize them, but to engage with them without giving up my principles and my values. Right. But, and that's where I think social change, one of the things that bothers me is I hear a lot of people talking about safe spaces. Now, I know I'm an old white cis male, and so I don't experience all the things that everybody else, but I've never experienced social change as safe. You have to take risks. You have to be daring. You have to go talk to people that aren't going to be, oh, yes, I agree with you right away. Otherwise, how are we going to build the majorities that we need to get to the place we need to get to?
That's right.
And so it's very risky, but it's also really rewarding. As you say, when in, their time, those folks come around and are changed, and you've played a role in changing them, there's nothing more gratifying.
That's right.
It's just exciting.
That's right. And I want to push back on you just a little bit in ways that I know that you'll appreciate, but on this notion of safe space, as an African-American woman with 2 teenage sons who are brown like I am, living in Florida.
Nothing safe there.
At the moment that we are right now, that I find that I have to remind them of how to stay safe in the environment that we're in. And I often find that my own inclination to be much more aggressive in terms of the organizing and advocacy that I would do here, that I have to allow other folks, particularly other Floridians who are white, to have conversations with lots of Floridians who are white in ways that I would not be able to. One,
Right.
because my voice is different, but also because it wouldn't be safe, literally physically safe, for me to engage certain kind of folks. So I want to also leave space for the kind of thinking about our own, social positioning and being aware of that, and the way in which we have to use each other as allies to figure out how to do that organizing. Talk a little bit about how you see that, particularly, you've experienced this. The 1960s and 70s was not safe. There was a lot of just, it is what it is, right? And so how you manage that then, and what would be your recommendations and ideas for practice today?
So, I think that what you're describing is very real, and that the racism that is being unleashed towards Black and brown people in particular is very serious and can't be discounted. And I would never at this point have an argument about whether people need to worry about their safety, their family's safety.
Yeah.
No, I meant more in the process of social change and organizing. No, absolutely. And, it was very dangerous in the 60s, particularly for Black people.
Yeah.
And there were, many people that I knew who were beaten up, who were shot at, who were bombed, and some who were killed.
Right.
The most vivid examples, of course, are Dr. King, but also Fred Hampton, who was the chairman of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, who was murdered in his bed. The FBI had his bodyguard on their payroll, and they drugged him, and then they shot into his bedroom. And I didn't experience that level of threat, though I will say, not infrequently, there were a couple of detectives in Boston who loved to, stop me, throw me up against the wall. And literally they would say, up against the wall. And and then take out their gun, put it to my head and say, one of these days we're going to blow your head off and, you maggot. And I believed that there was that possibility. I knew it wasn't going to be on a street in broad daylight. So when those would happen, I could smile at them and so on. And, a couple times I got beat up by police, but I didn't experience the level of violence that Black organizers did, particularly in the South. And so I think we're going to have to be courageous. And, there is always strength in numbers. And the key is to have numbers, and to have numbers that are organized and can sustain themselves. But I think things are going to get significantly worse before they get better.
I think so too.
I am not, I believe we can win. I really do believe that. I think we're seeing that for every action of the Trump administration, there is a growing reaction. But I don't know that anyone can foresee how far Trump and the MAGA people will go. I absolutely have no argument. I mean, I've talked to a number of Black leaders who, when we're organizing protests today, say, well, we're not going to encourage Black folks to come to that because we think it's just too dangerous. And I don't think you can argue with that. I think you can pose to them the question of, okay, what is the strategy that unifies us? What is the strategy that allows us to win and get out of this situation, which is so dangerous? But I would never argue that safety is not a concern, particularly now.
Yeah.
And we got through the 60s and 70s, but we got through it with courage, with strategy, with love, and with hope, and with always strength in numbers. Strength in numbers.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one question. In the book, you spend a lot of time talking about your experiences organizing, particularly the early part of the book as a student. And you talk about, even in the preface, that the book is written really, that your faith is really that young people will carry the next version of this movement forward. And one of the things that I think this administration has done is they sort of figured a little bit out about that. And the same tactics they were using when you were a student and being, right, organizing as a student. And you talk about the FBI, asking questions about you, coming, right, trying to intimidate you early on in the process, right, to intimidate you back into your role and out of those movements. Obviously, it did not work. But I see that same inclination happening again, the targeting of young people, because they know that, for better or for worse, young folks are usually the first ones out in the street. They're the first ones who take the risk, literally with their bodies, in the streets to protest. And so the statement that you made is exactly right, that lots of folks are being encouraged not to do that, particularly students of color, because of how dangerous that is. But I wonder, as I read your book, I was thinking that the same kinds of things were happening in the 60s and 70s. The same FBI agents who were showing up, not the same individual people, but the tactic, right, was still there. How do you think about that, just in terms of how we're expecting young people to show up, but they also have to address these very real tactics of what's happening to them, and they're putting their personal bodies literally in the street to be able to defend what is now our democracy?
I think it's a very hard time. I also really would never presume to tell today's young people what they should do. I just more have faith that they're going to figure it out, because it's a very different situation from when I was young. When I was young, I was part of the baby boom generation, and we were this huge cohort going through society and had enormous faith, and liberals commanded every political and cultural height and ran the country. And so we were rebelling against liberalism, not against what I think is, at this point, accurate to say is fascism or would be fascism. And the economy was thriving, so we didn't have student debt. We didn't have, the future of a gig job as opposed to a really permanent one, and so and there was an enormous amount of hope that. And hope is always easier to organize around than despair and cynicism. So I think things are different, but I really do believe that young people are going to find a way. They're going to fight for their future. They're going to fight for the planet's future. They're going to fight for justice. I just have total faith in that. And they're going to do it in their way. And if they can learn something from our successes and probably more from our failures, that would be great. And they're going to face repression. In 1969, there was the very last Students for a Democratic Society convention that blew apart. One of the reasons it blew apart was there were 120 FBI informants undercover working at it and accelerating the already crazy tensions and sectarian splits. And but I have to say, I think students today, particularly foreign students and students of color, are facing a level of repression that was greater than what we faced. I mean, yes, we had Kent State and Jackson State where kids were killed by National Guard, but in general, we didn't worry that we were just going to be picked up off the street and put into an ICE detention center 1,000 miles away. We didn't have that to worry about the way I think a lot of kids do today. But again, I just believe in young people. I believe in their capacity to challenge the status quo. I believe in their courage. And I believe that over the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to see more and more young people enter the struggle in their own way, on their own time, in their own fashion.
I think so too. I certainly hope so. I have to say, both my teenage sons say to me all the time, "We're just waiting for you old fogies to move out of the way. Move out of the way so we can create the world that like we know is possible."
Well, I think they're right, except they're making a mistake, which you are not old, right? Now,
Exactly.
my generation,
That's exactly right.
we're old, and we got to get out of the way. You know, it just drives me crazy to see so many old people who insist on staying in elected office and insist on staying in powerful jobs. It's like, no, we're old. We've done what we've done, and it's time for a new generation of leadership.
Yeah.
But you are not old, Dr. T.
Thank you very much. I concur. So I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to say one of the wonderful things that I've learned about you over a great many years is your poetry. This is not your first book.
No.
You've written other books, particularly books of poetry. I would love to have you talk about how poetry has been infused in the way you think about organizing and the way you think about how you are situationally positioned in the world, right, to do this work powerfully, in part because of that poetic streak in you.
Well, you know, I love poetry, and I think poetry and music sustain us in just very powerful ways. For me, poetry allows me to do a number of things, and some of it is to grapple with all the mysteries of the universe, all the things that I can't understand. I sort of turn to poetry, but I also think poetry and music allows us to express emotion, and also that reading poetry is an act of empathy. You can't try to get into a poem without trying to understand how the world looks to someone very different from you.
That's right. And
empathy is really important in this world. We don't have nearly enough of it. Clearly in Washington, we don't have any of it. And empathy, I think, changes how people look at themselves, look at the world, and look at what's possible. I also think that all too often, people try to reduce organizing and politics to formulas, to numbers, to very dry things. But if what we're trying to do is change the world, and we're trying to change people, then emotions are absolutely critical.
That's right.
And sharing those and tapping into people's hope in a variety of ways. You know, so to me, poetry and song, if I had my way, every meeting would start with people singing, and have somebody perform a poem, and then move on. You know, I just think, so I go back, when I was 13, 14, and 15, I would be in churches with entire church filled with Black folks. I'd be one of, 3 or 4 white people in that church. And I would find myself standing in the pews, not sitting, with our arms over each other and people singing. And it just nourished my soul, my crazy adolescent needy soul, in a way that nothing else could.
That's right.
And just made me feel part of something larger than myself. And that feeling of being part of something larger than yourself is so powerful and so rewarding. And I believe that singing together, I believe that poetry makes us feel that in a way that, dry Robert's Rules of Order meetings just can't do it. And so we need more poetry. We need more music. We need them all in all of our meetings. Absolutely everywhere.
Here. In the case making work, we talk about that all the time. Like, you got to get people a little bit out of their heads and into their heart space. They need heads, but they need heart space too. And there are all kinds of ways to do that. And you just spoke powerfully to that, whether it's, spoken word or, other kinds of poetry, it's singing, it's being creative in lots of different ways that just allow us to use our brains differently. to shape the world in front of us, and to think about even just the cultural production in front of us. I think even social media, which is, you have all the sort of influencers on social media, and lots of folks have figured out that, man, if you feed folks the energy around justice and around what it looks like to be inclusive, that they can create amazing things that can pull people forward faster and better than any new report that just got done or any new level of research that we can put together to try and get people to see the benefit of the systems that we're building. And so from my vantage point, having people really get that and bring that to the table of their case making is really important. Whenever I've talked to organizers and whenever I talk to folks who are activists or advocates, there's the professional work that they do. And then you talk to them and you realize they're songwriters, they play tennis, they go out or pickleball, they go out and they do all kinds of things in their personal lives, but they don't see those things as related. And I'm like, even if it's a tennis court or the soccer field or whatever it is, your ability to translate the energy of justice into those spaces and bring those forward is important. Even as a soccer mom, right? I'm on the sidelines of soccer. Let me tell you, there are a lot of conversations that happen with the other soccer moms that may start in one direction, but if you let me stay there long enough, we're going to have a conversation about the world around us and how we make that better for everybody. So I just feel like that opportunity to pull people forward based on the stuff that you love, that's all about heart space, and have it bleed into the work that you're doing to pull people forward on the justice journey is super important.
I mean, we have to nourish the soul, right? I mean, there is a reason that organized religion has lasted so long.
Yep.
And it's because ceremony, music, beauty, community, all nourishes in a way that we all need.
Absolutely.
And in today's world in particular, I mean, everybody's talked about the epidemic of loneliness. It's just getting worse and worse. So then when you organize, you want to develop ceremonies. You want to bring in music. You want to nourish the soul. You want to make people feel, not tell them, make them feel part of something that's really important and that's larger than themselves. Absolutely. And they have to feel that, not be told it.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Well, listen, I want to end our conversation on that because I'm feeling like a part of something bigger right here. Michael, I want to thank you for spending a little time with me today, talking about the justice journey that you're on. And I want to also lift up just one more time the book that has just been created, The Hard Work of Hope, and the incredible lessons that it shares with us. And again, I just got to tell you, reading, I'm like, wow, this is 1-to-1 in terms of like what this was like in the 60s, the 70s, and what we're living through today, which is what makes it so incredibly relevant for the moment that we're in. So I want to thank you not only just for sharing time with me, but also for sharing those lessons in the book. Thank you for that.
Well, Dr. T, thank you. It's always a delight, and I am a huge believer in the work that you do. And fierce case making is embodied by you in a way that I admire no end.
I love it. All right, folks, thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for the next version of our Fierce Case Making work. Thanks a bunch. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining me today. Every new conversation we have with a fierce case maker gives me new energy for the road. And I hope that as you listen today, you felt the same way. I believe in case makers everywhere. And if you don't quite see the fierce case maker in you just yet, hold on, just trust. Work those principles so that you can bring new champions to your justice journey. And if this information inspired you, then please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that you can be one of the first folks who knows when a new episode is dropped. And until next time, stay fierce.